Welcome everyone to the march. Okay. Welcome everyone to the March Discovering History seminar. I'm Dr. Ruth Fordra from the Lecturing History Program at LaTrobe, and these seminars are a fantastic community collaboration between LaTrobe University, the Bendigo Regional Archives, the Goldfields Library and the Golden Dragon Museum now. Before I introduce the speaker, I want to acknowledge the Dja Dja Wurrung as the traditional custodians of the land that we're listening to on tonight, and to pay respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge their sovereignty. The format for tonight is that the speaker will speak for 40 minutes and then we'll have 20 minutes of questions and discussion. Thanks to the Goldfields Library, fantastic technological skills, we're doing this both face-to-face and Zoom. At question time, we'll take the questions face-to-face first, and then we'll move to the people watching via Zoom. And with questions, you can either post your questions in the chat and I'll read them out, or you can just indicate that you want to ask a question and I will unmute you. So it now gives me very pleasure to introduce Katrina Dernelley, who's a postgraduate history student at LaTrobe University. And Katrina's thesis is a domestic, architectural and social history of the central Victorian goldfields, and she's examining the role of women, home and housework during the Victorian gold rushes. And Katrina is our pre-International Women's Day event, so it gives me pleasure to introduce Katrina, who's going to talk about life in the clearings, home and housewifery on the central Victorian goldfields. Thank you, Katrina.
Thanks, Ruth. Hello and welcome everybody here today, and also to those watching online. Already got a glitch, Stuart, it won't move.
Oh.
That's all right. Going well so far.
It's not you, it's the machinery.
Okay. So I need to do it over. Okay, so we wanted to go back to that one. There we go.
Cool.
So I live and work in Castlemaine on the unceded land of the Dja Dja Wurrung. In focusing my research on the central Victorian goldfields, I write about the land of the Dja Dja Wurrung and the Wathaurong, and I pay my respect to their elders past and present. I'm currently in my final year of a history PhD at LaTrobe, studying women, home and colonisation during the central Victoria gold rushes. At the heart of this is the argument that gold rush domesticity brought with it a new phase of colonisation, that gold rush settlers built upon the dispossession and the brutal massacre that had preceded their arrival, and that it was acts of homemaking by gold rush settlers to help make this dispossession permanent. Gold rush settlers did not arrive, as many migrants believed, into a wild Arcadian or wild and primitive landscape. They came to a land that was already both domesticated and home to Aboriginal peoples for tens of thousands of years. While we often think of the diggings as an industrial space or a political space, the diggings were also a domestic space. Women and children lived on the goldfields in their tens of thousands, and we hear from the earliest days of the gold rushes. Sometimes women followed their husbands or fiancés out after the men had been on the digging for months or even years, but often men, women and children travelled out to Victoria together as families, with the intention of settling permanently in what many call the land of their adoption. I opened my talk this afternoon with an image by well-known goldfields artist S.T. Gill, showing a family searching for gold. It is one of two images that are probably the most well-known of domesticity and family on the Victoria. The image you can see now is the second, also by Gill. It is an image of a digger's hut, the digger and his wife and baby. And you may well be familiar with both images. Familiarity and comfort were key to search for home on the Goldfields. I'd like to set the scene for my talk with an article from the Miners' Right newspaper of 1857. In the paper, a married digger described his typical evening home on the Goldfields. When he returned to his tent of an evening, he found himself to be hungry, tired, sometimes dispirited. He depended on the pleasant countenance of his wife and the dada of his little one to cheer him up. It was not only his wife's pleasant countenance, however, that he required. The miner also depended upon markers of domesticity, of housewifery, to ease his troubles, such as a snow-white tablecloth over a tea chest acting as a table, and a bright, shiny teapot placed beside the hearth. It was then the miner felt that he could stand and really enjoy, the good things that his wife had prepared. After dinner, the digger told the story of his day to the praise of his wife, heard in turn about her day, the white head had one day, a butterfly flew into the tent, held his baby while his wife cleaned up after dinner, and read his newspaper while his wife washed his feet and fetched his slippers. At the end of the evening, he retreated to a freshly made bed, and that nothing is better than a clean, sweet bed. It is a genuine luxury. The miner sleeps well. He does not hear the baby cry at night. He does not hear his wife awaiting before him to prepare his breakfast, and thus he is to go to work fresh and in good spirits. Throughout the article, the digger did not acknowledge the physical, mental, and emotional labour required of his wife to provide these comforts, nor did he recognise that his wife was presumed this behind her counter. His tale was one labour, and her daily exercise in time management, cleaning, laundering, gardening, shopping, cooking, fetching, clean water, and maintaining the fire, all while caring for their baby. The wife went to bed with him alone during the night to tend to him, and was up before him so his breakfast could be ready, or before he went to work on the diggings. All her work was hidden behind the more pleasing of baby's first dada and butterflies in the tent.
I have to admit to
a few favourite archive.
The first is a diary.
The first is a diary written by a woman on Goldfields in February 1852. Mary Ann Vowles, the author of the diary, was born in a small village in Somerset near Cheddar and the Mary Ann, the Reverend John Allen, in 1806. Wilton, then on to Birmingham, to York, to Glasgow, and finally to Portland in 1849. By then, the couple had 9 surviving children aged from 21 down to approximately 12 months.
In Glasgow, Mary Ann's
husband had been approved by John Dernelley to emigrate to what was then called the Travancore.
He was chosen to
bring the civilising influence of religion and morality to the colony. Barely 2 years after they'd arrived, the gold rush began, and Mary Ann, John and their family left the church and their private life on the wilderness.
When Mary Ann
first arrived at the in 1852, which you can see on the slide, huts of all descriptions, huts built of logs, stones and huts with others without, showing signs of comfort, others written we can observe the naked huts or maize without even a blanket or tarpaulin or anything more than the floor to repose. For Mary Ann, even where the comforts of life were procured, there were many privations unknown to civilised life. So this is Katrina.
What happened
It was already a really large variety of houses.
homes.
The one I want to draw attention to is this one, which is based on an Aboriginal mine.
For many male diggers,
the mine, the bark and branch homes of the local Aboriginal was their first attempt at constructing and claiming domestic space in the forest. By adopting forms of domestic architecture employed by indigenous peoples that they were dispossessing. There was an implicit acknowledgement that this land was, in fact, somebody else's home.
My motto
term that had been used by settlers in the Goldfields district prior to the discovery.
Home was important
Home was important to Aboriginal settlers, and symbols of home,
comprising
a variety of environmentally specific shelters,
often
were often
creation
included within the creation stories of southeastern Australia.
rather than being local.
The term Mai seems to have originated in Western capital from the Perth Albany region. In central Victoria, early colonists recorded the word for house or hut as being not the wrong word harum or the wrong word la. So,
If you look at these,
look at these carefully constructed things,
and this was
and this was the settler interpretation of them, which was more just branches in
so Europeans
Europeans thought Aboriginal minds as pensive structures, rough and built and scattered, nothing more than breakable towers, rather than the carefully considered structures that they were. So in going back, comparing the two.
in the gold rush environment,
In the gold rush environment, my mind would be accepted as early temporary dwellings by Goldfields newspaper correspondents noted that there were many of these villages constructed from wood, sticks, bark, leaves and branches. Among the tens of thousands of diggers were proud of their efforts, happily declaring that their self-built mansions were able to compete with any of the Aboriginal mines. Moving pigs.
No, I think it's important to note as well,
Whereas there's a great diversity in the sort of tents that artists drew on the Goldfields, and a lot of them it was like so there were some that were really practical, and there were often ones that had a very care about the lancing and the different details.
so when Agnes Gregg and her family
John Gregg had already arranged 3 tents in the club, and the site remained Agnes's home throughout her lifetime.
Agnes
Agnes would end up being a witness to the Red Uprising, was born in Scotland, and from age 17 to the Goldfields with her mother and siblings to meet her father and brother-in-law, who had travelled out the year previous. Her brother-in-law met them in Melbourne, and the party journeyed for 3 days to the Ballarat diggings. Her mother riding in a dray while the remainder. They slept at night under the dray, and Agnes recalled the great forest trees and the loneliness and the stillness of it, broken now and again by the strange night noises of the bush. And just as an aside, I'll point out, I haven't put another one on this one, the little square in the right hand, they often cut, and the window as well, so they often cut ventilation into the roof particularly to try and let the water out to make it more manageable in the heat.
So when they arrived in Ballarat,
we had never entered the tent before, and to those of us who were women, we looked for clear places to live, with saplings driven into the ground for bedposts and boxes for tables and chairs. We soon, however, got used to it.
Digger James Montague
Smith's new home comprised of tent, 2 stretchers and a bushcraft table. Even these simple items, he noted, made a pretty hole in his bones, but he considered himself to be tolerably comfortable. James's attempts at making could not be described as anything but decent. At night, he removed his pants, turned them inside out, and folded them to a pillow.
When Digger Henry Brown
arrived on the Goldfields, he was so eager to bring in the work of gold seeking, he dismissed any need for domestic labours. Instead, he pitched everything into the middle of the tent, forming, he recalled, a heterogeneous consisting of meat, glass, salt, flour, saws, ropes, canvas, twine, inlets, pannikins, pillars, and all the little necessities of life. Unfortunately for Henry, this lack of domestic forethought had immediate consequences. He had placed melted on the top of the pile, which melted in the heat and covered his belongings because he could not remove them.
During her
During the journey to the diggings, Marianne could romantically imagine filling her mattress with thistledown, which she noted it was gathered in the same manner as cotton, was comparable to feathers in this country, being softer down and more economical for the purposes of humble life. When she and her family arrived at the diggings, however, they made the typical bush bedsteads and filled their bed cases with dried leaves.
The
Allens also made a table of bark and covered the floor with the same material. However, it soon proved unsatisfactory as the bark decomposed quickly together, then emitting a smell which the family found exceedingly unpleasant.
So these are two of the
Two of the best images and there's a book by Jesse Searle back in remember, and it's hidden there, it was about 1990. But there's some beautiful images aren't anywhere else. Those these flag here about because I haven't been tracked them.
although many Goldfields shelters
So,
were rough,
although many Goldfields shelters were rough and primitive structures, considerable effort was spent domesticating them. Tents were recorded as being carpeted and lined with green baize or striped Indian cotton, and furnished divans dressing as armchairs, small tables, and even a grand piano.
and we can see that this image shows
And we
very
can see that this image shows a very interior for the Goldfields and
sometimes women,
sometimes women that life on the Goldfields, the bush tent or bush shelter would require the same level of maintenance as the home. Martha planned to open a shop on the Gold. She believed that in a tent her housework, if I may use that term, would take very little time. Martha's first meal on the way to the diggings immediately challenged her expectations. Having started a fire, put a billy on also. She was then handed a frying pan, meat to cook. A sheep's fry, which she recalled was not so nice, not a good looking object, and I'd never handled one before. The men in her party cooked it for her, but with an understanding that she would take up what was deemed her work once they reached the diggings. Even when Martha opened her cook with her sister, they tended her on alternate days so they could take turns doing the housework, including cooking for their families on the other day.
cleaning was
arduous and repetitive. Hard labour was compounded by the expectations that women would be held to a higher standard. The disorder, the domestic misery of the male-occupied dwelling, and James Bond with the short would be replaced by the presence of a female, cleanliness, regularity, and comfort. To remain clean and habitable, every Goldfield home had to be monitored constantly in a battle against the extremes of the mud in winter and the dust in the summer. And this is Thomas Marshall enacted the housewifery around 1852, and he was very convinced that in England advertising service galvanic current and electricity to stimulate the nervous system and cure other ailments, asthma, rheumatism, and weakness of the joints. And I wanted to know whether he knew that. Yeah, he had. I give you a galvanic factory, and Thomas illustrated it here in his tent.
You can see that it's lined with
and you can see that it's lined with chip and fabric, which is a coarse cotton, often with a wool centre. So,
Author William Howard,
during his 2 years on the diggings, reporting on the domestic goings on of his situation. We are, he wrote, housemaids or tent maids, cooks, what you will, all together, and then forth, chops and steaks and tea with a few plain puddings. He noted that they also like to eat what they call leather jackets. That is, thin cakes of flour and water with sufficient salt and little soda and acid, which we bake in the frying. Male diggers typically set out with naive expectations of a simple congenial life with the responsibilities of an established family. Antoine Faucher declared daily, few yards of canvas or calico to make you a tent, an axe, a frying pan, salt, tin mug, that neat need for domestic life. On their journey to the diggings, they cooked over a campfire and built basic shelters to protect themselves from the elements, for they slept under stars. And I'll point out the difference between what people wrote in journals and recollections, because this image was crowd from around 1850 52. Also has a lot of women and children. So mostly to the right-hand side. Oh, no,
So right from the beginning.
So right from the beginning, it was, and women there as well. So right from the beginning, the Goldfields were a domestic space. They were a space where women and children were. Even in 1852, which has been historically presented as a masculine space by masculine authors, women were all there.
Men expected to be self-sufficient domestically.
Men expected to be self-sufficient domestically. Derek Dangle Smith declaring that the poorest man in England never washes or cooks for himself, or mends his clothes, or keeps his house tidy, yet he will have to do it. Many, however, underestimated the labour required to make a really comfortable home. Left to their own devices, typical daily meals were often simple and repetitive. Mutton chops cooked in or over a campfire, or in a frying pan if they possessed one. A plate was considered, sometimes considered extravagant, when damper could do the same job and didn't have to be washed. We have those that indulge in plates, knives and forks, but it must not be supposed that all are so fastidious, declared Sally fondly. Besides, the chops can be picked out of a frying pan, placed on a lump of bread and cut with a clasp knife that has done good service in fossicking today. Billy tea or coffee were brewed with what water was available, and often was barely fit for consumption. When boiling water was boiling, Henry Brown describes that like a thick piece of scum rose to the surface, he skimmed off with a piece of butter. However, when plenty of tea and sugar was put in, the composition was not so very bad. Generally, diggers did their housework on half-British Sunday, during which all gold seeking was suspended, but occupations concerned with domestic were tolerated. One digger washed their clothes, enlarged or consolidated their tents, cut down trees to feed the kitchen fire needed, and baked their bread. Sometimes diggers' approach to housework could be creative. For example, fleas were removed from bedding by throwing the blanket over the mantel and placing an oat-blossom rug on top first aid. The sun's heat drove the fleas from the rug to the blanket, where the ants were waiting in legions to pounce on them and carry them off.
And this is the image that
I had for the fly. And it was slightly fortunate that we were talking about the woman, the wife, the husband is showing the husband.
So eventually, however, the adventures of single life Garrick receives the solution and his wife's skills in the laundry and the kitchen became highly valued on the Goldfields. William Kelly, upon seeing a digger's dwelling included trim and tidy as a woman's hand naked, declared that the digger had another treasure, like a prince. Consequently, Goldfields' marriages were often paid in purely practical arrangements in which men sought a house to help them attain comfort. Where there were only when there was a woman present, the expectation was that the housework would naturally pass to her. In regards to cooking, for both men and women, even dressing for good was of limited usefulness if the only food available was tea, mutton, and damper. Other options had to be hunted, including kangaroos, birds such as parrots, crows, and warblerbirds. And often people writing about that would describe how beautiful they were, and then say, and then my son went out and shot it for dinner. And freshwater mussels or fish, both of which were found to be insipid, and leeches from the local waterholes. Vegetable garden was worth of labour because of the scarcity and the prohibitive cost of purchasing fresh vegetables. Gordon Duncan recalled that people cannot conceive the high cost of living for diggers. Provisions of this sort were very high priced. 6 months could go by without eating any vegetables. And often cabbages were the most expensive vegetables for some reason. Making the time a housewife spent on the vegetables. Cooking was over and over. When it rained, Mary and Ellen wrote, could not burn without a covering of bark, and then were obliged to stand in the wet to miss out food. Margaret Glendinning, whose husband was Perth Strong, over her with an umbrella while she was to the autumn fire, decided to get a chimney for an internal fireplace. Was Mary and Ellen, as it enabled her to bake dancing with Daniel and Diana. She also found it to be a great convenience in drying
fine changes of clothes, as their blankets and linens were often covered with damp mould from dead spot. Each night, the ends of the fire had to be covered with a blanket of bark ready to be kindled the next morning. Then, when the cooking was undertaken within the fireplace in the home, scrubbing the layers of mud and dust, combined with heavy residue and cooking grease added to the wet clothes, as well as dust in summer. Flies were a problem.
Water was scarce for both
consumption and despite the best attempts of officials to reserve water it quickly dried up, and contaminated, leading to epidemics of disease.
Mary Ann Allen,
unable to procure water, having to travel each day in search. Once in desperation, a German miner gave her children water, which loaded gun, one of our family, procuring water for the victims to drink. Even when there was a water available locally, it was often undrinkable, as the leaves would fall into it, decompose, and rotten flavour.
Mary Ann noted that where the
gold was abundant, the water was very unpleasant.
Martha Clendini woke up after her first night sleep on the bed with
both herself and her bedclothes thickly covered
Mary
with dust. Mary Ann complained that the dust in Goldfields was often knee-deep, and there was frequent references to dust being knee-deep and in mud being deep as well.
The advent of rain
nearly and volume of dust for swamp. One newspaper described the Goldfields after the flood as slimy and fluid, clean things.
Then there were the
tides of Goldfields and slush, known to obliterate water, previously used for domestic purposes, and to sweep things away. Mary Fortune took to sleeping with an umbrella propped over her pillow to catch a breeze from the thin calico roof, and the weeds on her head flapping and bulging in the wind against her bed. I'm just going to talk about the slides. So this is a slab hut to make but it's very similar to the technology that was found in Goldfields. With the exception of, so you can see up in the top small yard, her maintaining but everything else about this, the table, the C, the T check, which would come out with so everything about this is fairly going on the right hand side of that plate. Everything about that was built on the diggings.
So this image
of Castlemaine, and I apologise to my Bendigo audience, but a little bit Castlemaine, but I guess this is quite good images. But this one, fantastic image, which is if you start to get in close, you can see housing material that you use, and see the gardens that were laid out. So, I mean, nothing to people at home. Here there's before garden established.
And here is something either being
either being put up or taken down, so you can see the structure.
But then also you can see that. Just on the outskirts of Castlemaine.
The landscape seems completely liberated, and people are still living very basic lives. So there's a real difference between what's happening in town and what was happening just on the outskirts.
And also once again you can see corner. It's all been made to look quite ideal.
It's all been made to look quite ideal. Landscapes being completely
shown by this one. Now with this one you can
shown by this one. Now with this one you can see nothing like this.
But that one
like we were in the sort of 1860 and the front one around 18 probably 50 and then this one about 1960. So you can see that they use there's a little montage of photos because it shows women and children and families. So don't have a lot to say about them. It's just that they were there. And her house still been photographed in 1963. It's been there longer than that. So people were very proud of the homes. They were making homes in the UK. And then last one, I think the last one is so my great-grandmother, Isabella, who had 4 different children on 3 different Goldfields, and 58 my great-great-grandfather, and I think that's probably one of the children, also Isabella. And they had tents, then they went to this building here, which is around 1870. That then became the kitchen when they built the next house. So they would reuse the buildings, they wouldn't always not be there. Penny Golden. In conclusion, and I feel like I rushed a little bit. In conclusion, creates livable, or at least livable domestic environments on the Goldfields with varying degrees of enthusiasm. And the transitory nature of the Goldfields and the home needed to be repeatedly picked up and re-established. Initially, men worked together and established domesticity. Often they were groups of strangers united by cultures. However, it would appear that when the novelty of house wore on, men and women expecting natural moments to willingly take on the exhausting daily labour of housework. Even when women worked beside their husbands on the diggings or outside the home, the labour-intensive, everyday work of renting and maintaining a home was assumed to be women's responsibility and purpose. The last 2 slides, so this one is showing the difference between the reality of home in the Goldfields and the artistic representation of home in the Goldfields. Very much. Thank you very much.
It's really
Study.
We'll start with face-to-face questions. The audience watching online, you've got 2 options. You can either come out to the front, so you'll be recorded by the audio and the mic, or you can say your question where you are, and I'll try and help. Which is also done. That's your moment for stardom. That's right.
Get the ball.
Then go to stardom.
Katrina, it's been a wonderful insight into the early diggings. I was surprised that you did not mention the number of Jacob people who have survived that early stage that traded in their skills, such as providing bark for the dwellings and things like that. So, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, it's a
how much talk about women, and because it was typically men that provided that service for gold. But they did. So there was still wrong people on the diggings, and they provided information. And it's difficult to find a lot of evidence, but there's evidence in the structures, so they seem to provide a lot of information in how things were built. When you start to look at early weatherboard cottages, we have the look of a canvas tent with a kind of my veranda, and they were described that sort of technology in the newspaper. There was definitely a transfer of knowledge, and also the Aboriginal peoples did provide labour in that they showed settlers or provided for cost, how to construct the buildings for them, how to strip the trees, how to break down the different elements of the trees to use it for different parts of the structure.
Other questions?
A lot of people,
when you go thinking of questions
into the
into the
online Zoom audience to each other, and
and you can either ask your questions in the chat or you can just ask them
real live time.
real live time. There's Charles.
Well, what people are everyone.
To ask you more about, can you say more about community and housework? Because I think you gave really interesting and never talked about. They would never have done it back in. Talk about. Can you talk about that aspect of masculinity and how they, how else they kind of had to cope with that transition and what that might have done to their kind of their image of themselves as a minor.
It was really, so
there's a lot of information about approach domesticity when they came to the beginning.
very much.
And it was very much divided between whether there was a woman there or whether there wasn't. So if there was a woman there, they just kind of went, not my problem.
But
often they would organise a household, so they'd come up to the diggings in a group. They would either share a tent together or they'd position tents together, so they made a little community, and there would be either a designated housekeeper or that they would take turns, and so and they were proud of themselves. Described really disgusting sounding, and one always sticks out is a man very, very proud of his roly-poly, which was boiled with chopped up mutton inside it, and I couldn't imagine anything more edible. But they would talk quite proud about the fact that they were setting up the house, about how they were lining it, and that was something that I always feel like if I see Sovereign Hill, I want to go in and say they were lined, all the tents were lined, and I always try and imagine what it would have been like, especially in Green Bays, living in this little sort of hut that had that dark green light all the time.
But they would talk quite.
About the things they did to on their domestic day, so that the other men would go off and work their claim, and then they would prepare a meal and tidy the tent, but it got to a point where it was obviously adventure, and then we're not so interested anymore.
Will there be a book exhibition?
I hope so.
I hope so. I've got a friend in an art gallery, and I was actually just talking to her the other day to say I think there's a lot of really good images out there that aren't the traditional images that you search in the Goldfields history, and I think that an exhibition based on home and digging would make a wonderful display. And clearly there's an appetite for it. I'm yet to find people that would go to something like that. So I hope you will.
Those intimate images that give such a different concept of life on the go.
So another question, from the Zoom participants.
Is there any information about I've done the research on the Bendigo diggings, 1855, indicates that Darragh survived poor quality water and food.
This is where my supervisor.
This is where my supervisor was watching those all a sad story. So infant mortality is not as high as we would imagine. It was high, and a lot of people lose their children on wasn't that a lot of children didn't survive, though. A lot of children did survive. In fact, I believe, and this is me, I believe around the 1890s there were a lot of men in Parliament that would actually say, I grew up on the diggings. So there were generations of families that grew up on the diggings. But infant mortality and infanticide did happen on the diggings, and infanticide is one of the things that I'm looking into at the moment. A woman named Mary Minogue came out from Ireland, and she was pregnant with a legitimate child, married someone very quickly on the diggings, and then on the day that the baby was born, drowned it in the Goldfields. So there's lots of really sad stories. They're all sensationalised in the newspaper. So there's a lot of very graphic detail. The way children and people, domestic violence and those sorts of things that sadly happen in the home.
And just for another, great talk, Katrina.
Great talk, Katrina.
Can you talk
a little about what the different kinds of sources offer? Diary, what kind of visuals provide that the diary doesn't, and vice versa?
With the things that I'm looking at,
diaries, few photographs, not very many. Photographs tend to come in the 1860s, and I'm mostly focusing on the 1850s. And artists' representation of the Goldfields. The ones that are most useful with the artist representations are actually the sketches that they took from their sketchbooks, rather than their presented images at the end. They show a lot more domesticity and a lot more real life. With the diary and the journal, the difference between the diaries and the letters, what I'm finding is the letters are much more practical. So they talk about the practicalities of what they're seeing. Sometimes they're a little bit, there's a little bit of propaganda in them, so people write home because they're wanting their family to come out, so they paint a slightly rosy picture of what they're doing. And sometimes those letters were published in the newspapers back home. And then with the journal, so I refer to Marianne Ellen's journal, a lot of her writing, I'm presuming that she was intending to publish at some point, because it's written as if it was for an audience, and it's also written in a way as if she was an audience. So she would talk about going down to the shops, which is important, and on the way home she saw a bushfire, so they stopped to watch the bushfire, and then they went home. And it was slightly a bit of sort of theatre in the way that they presented the information.
Another question. My grandmother's lived on the Gold.
had a large family, so it wasn't just mortality.
Children died of infectious diseases and from falling into open fires. Was this common?
I don't know how
it happens. Certainly, they also fell into coal mines, into rivers, into just went wandering off into the bush. There's a reason why people were genuinely afraid of the Australian bush, of what would happen if their children roamed too far from the tent, because bad things did happen. And so instead of sticking on my feet here, and because of that idea that I'm looking at life in the series, that threshold between the clear space and the bush space, I think there's a really interesting sort of tension there. I don't know if that actually answers the question, but anyway.
Either from people here face to face, or people who are watching online.
Come up, Bella.
Do you want to come up, Bella? Do you want me to
federal code, as we know. So
What, did you notice any sort of different types of dwellings coming about as different nationalities built different dwellings, or were they?
So the question is, different nationalities, and so were there different types of stuff from those different ethnic backgrounds?
I haven't seen
the images that I've been looking at, but they do write about it in the newspapers. So,
and in a way
that I can't think of the right way to put it. I'll tell the story and you can make the judgment. So, people that were British, but in particular English, possess a lot of
sense of self as an English
on recreating what they could find at home, even though it was categorically and quite obviously unsuitable to Australian climates. They would then write quite dismissively about think of one article in particular, writing quite dismissively about the French and the Italians, who were awful urban houses, which would have been, of course, much more comfortable and much more practical. So there was definitely a difference, but it was seen as art. Like you weren't recreating a proper English home if you weren't what those foreigners were building, even those foreigners were building something that would be far more comfortable for them.
Did that include garden style?
Yes.
There's a lot of images.
There's a lot of images that show formal gardens. I think that there was,
And the reason I
write about a lot of English and British people is twofold. One is that they were establishing what was normal. So there were more of those, more people from Britain, but also they were the people in power. They were setting the standard for what home was. But also the archives aren't great for the other. So it suits my topic because I do talk about colonisation. But the archives also aren't there to show as much of what was happening with people from other countries. But when you look at the images, the Englishness and Britishness and English cottage gardens really dominate those kind of images.
I just wondered if any of the audience here in terms of Taylor Street. Do you have any comments from their own research in terms of Chinese dwellings and also dwellings?
While people are thinking, I should say, if you want to put forward, I'm very to receiving anything that people have either research that they think would add to what I'm doing, but also, Bendigo and Victorian Goldfields, if anyone's got stuff, I really want to see it.
And that I was thinking about gardens, because when you spoke about
fairly well documented knowledge about Chinese gardens and how Chinese supply.
Can you just paraphrase that?
I would say so. So we're talking about
they're well documented on the Goldfields, and so
the writing about
the lack of vegetables tends to be an early thing, and a lot of my research is focusing on a much earlier time of how people set up.
So the reason it's
called lichen is because one, it was landscape, the landscape, but the processes that they go to. So they had to be people as well as landscape to create that. And that is the bit that I'm interested in, that process of clearances, and especially since a lot of people came out who were subject to clearances in the country that they came out from.
So going back to your yes, there are. In the bit that I'm looking at, I'm reading about
Chinese settlements, but they're often quite ostracised. At that point in time that I'm reading, they're very separate in other, and I'm trying to think of the delicate way of putting English women would not go into a settlement like that to procure their vegetables.
I don't know which point, and that's
So I don't know which point, I don't know at which point it becomes more commonplace.
Now, on the dividends, we had a lot of a substantial number of Germans, and I found in some of the research that I've done that the Germans very quickly used brick as a means of cooking, and there's still in certain parts of the periphery of the Goldfields here in Bendigo of some of those structures. And of course, don't forget the native stone as well, which was just put together with that. And that was, of course, something that became a very important element. Now, you did mention something about cabbages. Was that exactly that you said?
They were very
I'll make a comment about cabbages as a very, very well. And that's one reason why people started to grow them on the Goldfields. And of course, the Chinese, they grew a lot of leafy type vegetables, which are also very similar to a cabbage in many respects, and the minerals goodness that provides. But you'll find that the Chinese on the whole are much healthier than the Caucasian because of the variety of food that they were eating, that the Caucasians were not eating.
No, there's nothing to be sorry about.
There's nothing to be sorry about. Desire for cabbage.
Any other questions or comments or suggestions for Katrina?
I just make a comment that
I probably need to look into what the packing case was, how were the goods transferred, how were the possessions transferred.
many of those
items, particularly when you go to the people in
bamboos,
the bamboos that they use for packing items into the porcelain, the mud containers that they use, these all became water barrels and all sorts of stuff. And so it's a lot of what.
when we traveled to Africa, we started with what
We need
and maybe
and maybe couldn't get there. So what would be the most practical thing? I pack garbage rather than shipping. So I think we need to look back in that period. What did these people also use?
we know that
We know that some of them already made their food out, but maybe they didn't use it for a couple of years. The first few years, they used it to build their house.
I think those
I think also
it's very difficult to know how they are.
Yeah.
So the question from the audience is about investigate more the issue of the packing cases or what people had available with them and how that might have varied across different ethnic groups in terms of Chinese using bamboo.
Really, it's really which I just need to say. Yes,
Any other last question? Okay. Everyone can join me. Natasha is also a postgraduate student from the university, and Natasha's going to be talking about heavyweight flat cemetery, memorialising pioneers. And then 6th of May, we in the Golden Dragon Museum, who will be doing his seminar on parade committees, secret societies, and Protestant Bendigo Chinese community organisation that's represented in the Golden Dragon Museum. So email list, there's an email list, for things that's on the door. If you're on Zoom, post and I'll add you to the email list. And the year program will be emailed soon. Start of semester. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming, both online and face to face, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks very much.